Well, we've got another panel discussion, but as Cindy and I were thinking about it this morning, we were just so shell-shocked with the fact that this date has finally arrived that we did a major faux pas and forgot to properly introduce Peter Miscovich.
Okay.
Although I think many of you know him and that he doesn't probably need an introduction, Peter's been really one of the main thought leaders in this industry for a number of years. The good work that he had done at PwC in workplace transformation. He's now the managing director at JLL, leading the workplace innovation. So without further ado, I turn over to the panel.
Thank you. Well, I have the honor of hosting the second panel of the day, and I had three of the largest companies in Accenture, Citigroup, and Siemens, and I have the honor of moderating with three CEOs. And I think the topic is of great relevance given Steve's presentation on sort of the combinatorial evolution of technology. And so without further commentary, I'd like to introduce Mark Gilbreath, CEO of LiquidSpace, Ben Waber, CEO of Sociometric Solutions, and Matt Lauzon, CEO of Dunwello. And we're going to start with each giving a brief VC, succinct-led definition of their firms, and then we're going to talk about the quantified workplace. And the quantified workplace is coming to all of you very soon. You may not know that yet, but if you read Ben's articles in Business Week, the quantified workplace is here, and it's only going to expand. So with that, Mark, why don't you begin?
So I'm the CEO of LiquidSpace. We're one of those app thingies that Steve talked about. So we're a technology company. We've built the world's largest real-time marketplace for workspace. So in simple terms, we're helping your employees, consumers, do that thing that Steve was talking about, which is consumerize their own experience at work. So with LiquidSpace, they can simply find and book the best space to work, whether that's on-site at your offices or on the go. So to put a finer point on that, with our app, either on their iOS device or their Android device, or through the web, they can find and book a desk or a meeting room that might be inside your own portfolio that they can see because they're an employee. But they can also see the largest network of external spaces, hotels like Marriott and Hilton, office centers, co-working spaces, even other private companies that are sharing excess space that they no longer need in their portfolio.
Great. Ben.
Great. So my name is Ben Waber. I run a company called Sociometric that spun out of my research at the MIT Media Lab. I like to think of what we do as Moneyball for business. What we do is we use sensing technology to look at how people interact and collaborate at work, and then use that data to figure out what actually makes people successful and happy at their companies. It's really interesting because when it comes to being data-driven, companies have been very data-driven about their customers, but they've really forgotten about that when it comes to our people. Normally that's because it's very difficult to measure how people are actually behaving. But now with the proliferation of sensor technologies Steve was talking about, we can actually measure how you're talking to each other, how information is flowing, and how that flow of ideas and where that happens actually relates to outcomes. And we deployed our technology across a couple dozen companies, and I think today we'll talk about some of those results. But as Peter was talking about, everyone's going to have to do this. This is something where we need to be data-driven about what we do, because the way we're doing it today just isn't working.
Matt, your business model.
So the company's called Dunwello. We're definitely the newest company. If you go to dunwello.com, you'll see that there's no information about what we do. So there. This is the first time I talk publicly about Dunwello. Basically, we're a very mobile-centric platform that makes it easy for people to give each other feedback and recognition at work. And instead of sort of trying to replace legacy systems or HR systems at work, we're doing our best to be complementary. So we're also preserving those really important moments, whether they're so important that they're worthy of recognition or important because they warrant critical feedback, and structuring them in such a way that it can be useful for the individual at their next review or the company looking back at who's accomplished what in the last year.
Yeah, in fact, Matt's company is known as the replacement for the performance management review, which has gotten a lot of criticism, I think.
Yes.
That it's really quite innovative, and you're going to share some of your disruptive innovation. So let's talk a little bit about the risk. Let's start with you, Ben. Google in 2013, through the algorithmic big data combinatorial power of Google, they predicted the flu pandemic rather erroneously.
Yeah.
And would love to get your thoughts on, okay, big data is great. You can measure employees in all these different ways.
Yeah.
But what are some of the risks? And I'd like each of you to give a client example of how the quantified workplace is using your technology as an enablement platform. So Ben,
Sure.
let's start with you.
So there's a lot of risks when it comes to trying to collect data about what people are doing in the real world. First one that comes to everyone's mind is privacy, right? If Big Brother is watching you, what does that actually do to the morale of a company? If I feel like people are watching me all the time, first of all, you get pretty self-conscious.
A little paranoid.
Well, that's right. But well, maybe legitimately so. Right? But I think what's important is that any sort of benefit you're going to get from that technology is going to be defeated by how it actually changes the morale of the company.
Yeah.
And compounding that risk is that if you're just collecting this data and you're not providing actionable feedback, you're not actually creating real knowledge, then you're going to have problems. I thought it was instructive when Steve was talking about how many people here are using a quantified self device. And not a lot of people are using it today. Actually, the average usage time on a Fitbit is about 4 weeks. And then people stop using it. It's just giving you a graph about what you're doing. It's not actually driving behavior change. And that, I think, is extremely important. And so what we've been able to do, first of all, when we deploy our technology, some ways we get around this is we do it on an opt-in basis. We don't give individual data to companies. And it's something where we give people consent forms where they can see the actual database tables of what we collect. Now, what we've been able to do is use this to show, for example, that when employees have a very, well, here's a good example. So with a large pharmaceutical company, we saw that if you talk 10% more to people in another group, in their sales and marketing team, that actually increased sales.
By phone, by email, by?
Face-to-face.
Face-to-face.
Yeah, and actually email didn't have this effect.
Got
if you
it.
look at face-to-face and I talk 10% more to people on other teams, my sales went up by over 10%. That's worth hundreds of millions of dollars to this organization. Now, one of the biggest enablers of that, again, is physical space. And they had this huge missed opportunity because they had about 1 coffee area for every 6 employees at this company. As a consequence of that, they had really crappy coffee because they were going to have to hire somebody to just refill coffee if they had more than regular and decaf. But also it means that when you went to the coffee machine, you saw people that were in your group that you already knew. As a consequence of these analytics, what the company did is something that seems very simple. They invested a couple $100,000. They built up a new central coffee area. And they put in seating, better coffee. And the rationale was, we can show that there's an ROI on this. We can measure how many more interactions this is going to create. And then we can show how this increases sales. And if you do that even by a small percentage, it has an effect. In their case, it increased sales by over 20%, which is gigantic. They forecast to be flat. And think about how small a change that is relative to what you would expect to do at that level.
And so it's like a social network analysis linked to coffee, linked to big data, linked to analytics, linked to sales. Is that a fair statement?
I guess so, if you link all the things together, sure.
OK, excellent. Mark, your firm has been termed the new replacement for corporate real estate in the workplace. What do you think about that? And how is LiquidSpace disrupting the corporate real estate environment and becoming, shall we say, more of a quantified workplace platform?
I think we're doing it by first recognizing that there's a new change master in the corporate workplace realm. We used to be the change masters. We used to hire the consultants, develop a point of view, audit our communities, come up with an approach, and then prescribe that to the organization. And the new change masters are now mobility and choice. And those are 2 powers of the individual. And so now the individual employees are making their workplace choices. They're designing their setting on a day-to-day basis. And so I think we start with that point of view that the real power for us as managers and for organizations is to empower the individuals, give them a range of choice. And it may be that the range of choice we want to give them is just within the mobile domain of our own office. So we go to hot desking and we follow the path of Accenture.
Intra-campus.
Intra-campus. So let's drive efficiency
Right.
in our own portfolio by allowing choice inside. Other companies that we're working with, Accenture included, are allowing that choice to extend to the outside as well. And as a result, are able to compress their portfolios. So
you're a combination of big data, mobility,
Well, I think that, so on the data component, I think everybody should have raised their hand when we were asked if you're carrying or if you're wearing a quantified self-device. We all are, right?
Yeah.
So if you provide empowerment to your employees, you give them something with your strategy, you give them choice, right? And you give them a reason to use an application. Maybe I can use it to find my colleagues and then take a desk. Yeah. Data flows from that. Data on the use of the asset, data on the behavior of the employees, richness that you can then act on as a real estate professional.
And so from that data exhaust, as you map hundreds of thousands of employees across millions of square feet, you can start mapping and seeing patterns and...
Absolutely, and given that employees from over 16,000 companies have used LiquidSpace, I would guess that somebody in every one of your companies has already used this. The data exhaust is already being accumulated. Yeah. And you now, as executives, can start tapping into that exhaust to make more informed decisions about your own portfolios.
Powerful. Matt, enablement of Dunwello as a quantified disruptor to HR, and what's the benefit to the employees? Why as an employee, would I want to use Dunwello?
Yeah, there's benefits in the moment, and there's benefits retrospectively. And in the moment, I think feeling appreciated, feeling aligned, feeling like you're advancing, and doing that peer-to-peer, I think is really powerful and important and motivating. Ultimately, driving people being happy and productive at work. But in the long run, I think establishing a highlight reel of sort of the key moments along the way of things that you're accomplishing, I think individuals see a lot of value in.
And do the managers of do you have a client example where the manager feels, I'm really glad we used Dunwello because I really know how my people are performing? Can you give some concrete?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, because if you look at the ecosystem of the different types of users that we're seeing across companies of, from Fortune 500 to startup, the different user types have very different benefits. So the individual sees it the way that I just described, but the most common success story that we're seeing right now is that sort of team leader, individual departmental manager, who loves the fact that this is offloading a ton of work for me, because now I'm putting the control into the hands of the employees to recognize each other.
I'm not doing 200 annual employee reviews in December or whatever.
Well, the other nice thing is we play really well with the legacy system. So if you're using SuccessFactors or whatever else, by the time it comes time for that review, we've basically pre-populated 80% of it for you based on what the employees have recognized each other for. And then the last thing we're seeing the best success is where you have distributed teams, the ability for them to sort of crowdsource best practices, and then for the manager to highlight the best behavior and quickly disseminate it across the teams are really powerful.
I think in researching Dunwello, what I found interesting, if you have remote distributed teams that don't have a lot of face time, Dunwello sort of normalizes and harmonizes performance, which I think is a big factor, especially those of us raised in the boomer age where we were command and control. Are you in the office 12 hours a day? Oh, he must or she must be a good employee, right? I mean, you sort of, is that a fair statement?
Totally. And I'm going to talk about it in a presentation after this, but I think that there's this void where the employees are feeling disengaged because they don't have a feed that's making them feel connected. But I really think, and Ben talks a lot about this, we're going to a world where you got to think like a CMO in some ways, and I think as
Chief Marketing Officer.
Right. So the evolution of HR seems to be sort of like the evolution of marketing, and in two major ways. One being going from command and control to community management, but the other being like you're crazy if you're making decisions that aren't sort of based in data. And those two things are really, really critical, and I think important flip sides to the quantified coin is that community aspect of things.
Okay, let's look to the future, and then we'll open up for questions. 10 years out, Ben, the quantified workplace, your vision.
Well, I think what you're going to start seeing is, again, everybody really using this technology, but not just to get feedback about your own behavior or to push analytics at like an organizational level, really fundamentally using this data to change the way that management happens. So for example, now that we're collecting this data all the time, whether it's from your cell phone, whether it's from your ID badge, whether it's from environmental sensors, that data is coming in all the time. Think about what we do with online with that sort of data. We A/B test things. Or we use the data to change the experience when you're on a website, when you're in an app. Now imagine we can do that with the way we actually manage companies. Right? Imagine you say, listen, I don't know how to pay people. I don't know where people should sit. Let's try 20 different models and see how it changes behavior. And in a couple weeks, you'll know whether it worked or not, and you'll quickly be able to iterate on that and roll that out across the entire company. You might even be able to use that data to actuate this space. What I want is I want the Harry Potter workspace. I want the coffee machine to have wheels on it, and I want it to be a robot. And I want at night, I want to be able to tell the coffee machine to move over here between these two groups, because I want them to talk to each other. And it's silly, right? It's what does that mean? But again, if we saw with the pharmaceutical company example, that actually could be a very powerful management tool. That could be more powerful than managing the org chart. So I think stuff like that, that's very subtle. You're not going to see the coffee machine spinning around during the day, but at night making slight changes to the way we work and encouraging us to behave in certain ways, I think is very compelling.
And Ben, I want to make sure we plug your new book, which I was reading the weekend. Please, let's
People
do.
Analytics. Everyone should buy,
People
again,
Analytics.
multiple copies on Amazon. It's a great gift.
Christmas
I'm
is
not
coming.
biased.
I'll email
I'm
it
not
to
biased.
you.
Right, Christmas is only how many months
So
away?
it's coming.
I mean,
People
that's right.
Analytics.
Exactly.
It's a good read. It's worth reading.
There we
Mark,
go. I got to give you your $20
Thank
after we
you.
get off.
Mark,
Okay.
Mark, your vision, 10 years out.
Two things. So we've talked, real estate's been about assets for the longest time, and it's becoming about people, which is great, finally. But first, I'll give you an asset vision and a people vision. From an asset standpoint, I think we'll look back at this coming decade as the great era of unbuilding. I think a lot of the energies of the service providers in this room are going to be applied toward figuring out how to harvest the existing built landscape, because it is massively underutilized. It's an enormous footprint economically and environmentally. And we're beginning to see the right path emerge, tapping into the inventory that's there rather than building more towers. So there's the asset vision. On the people side, I love Marie's forecast. I just happen to think that the vast majority of the stuff that she painted for 2040 is going to be here in 2024. Yeah. In particular, I think that the workplace is going to be an incredibly personalized experience. I think real estate's about to become infinite. Right? As an employee, there will be infinite options for me. I'll no longer be constrained to the assets that my company provides. Yeah. It's going to be infinite. And wherever I go, that application that I reach for to connect to space is going to understand me. It's going to be smart. It's going to know what all of my past shopping decisions were, and it's going to guide me to the most magical place in the moment in real time.
Where do I want to work today? Any day. Yeah. Matt, I know you're going to speak after this, but your vision looking out.
Yeah, I think the simplest way to say it is I think we're quickly moving towards a world where the head of HR is going to have the same caliber of tools at their disposal that the head of marketing has. And my background, my first company I started was an e-commerce company. We sell fine jewelry online. And the power of all those tools, from crowdsourcing what we should be putting in front of customers to what we name it all the way through, it's so personalized. And there's so much leverage to be had there, and there's no reason why we can't apply all those same tools and principles to this, which is our most important asset, our people.
Great. We'll open it up. We've got a few minutes for questions. 5 minutes for questions. Any questions? Quantified workplace? Yes, in the back.
This may be politically incorrect, but it has to do with a company called Ripple that was purchased by Microsoft. Was it Microsoft or was it SAP?
Salesforce.
What happened to it and what's going on?
It's work.com now.
Can you describe what the company does?
Yeah, so Ripple actually was similar intentions, but I think a little bit too early and a different invention in terms of trying to build something that made it easy for people to give each other feedback and recognition at work.
I mean, it sounds like the same value prop, so I don't know why. Why did it die because it went to a big company? Is that why?
Yeah, what I would say is, it's a great question. There's a lot of stuff to be learned. In the spirit of making the most of this, in my presentation, I'll make sure we talk about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I say people can sign on to Dunwello, right, and test you out?
So you can't, but you can request access.
Okay. I tried.
No,
write Matt a $100,000 check,
Right.
and then
if you go to
You can
Dunwello.com,
use it.
you can request access.
Right.
I will review who requested access today and put you at the top of the queue.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, one or two more questions. Way in the back there, a couple in the back. State your name and organization, please.
Hi, my name is Samuel Lyon, and I'm a workplace strategist with HOK. I'll try to be quicker than my last question. The question this time is, when it comes to creating a feedback system, when you work with individual organizations or organizations you plan to work with, what challenges do you foresee in changing process by creating a new externalized standard for performance?
That's to Matt.
Yes.
I'm a magnet today. I feel. Thank you. I tweeted before this that I was really nervous. No one asked me a question, so thank you. We are doing our best to build our product to be non-hierarchical, so any team at any company can get up and running without endorsement or sign-off or even support from the executive team, and it's a very different approach that way. But number two, we're not trying to replace the legacy systems. In fact, we want to make the legacy systems even more valuable. Yeah. So a lot of what we're doing with the product, and this is a very different thing from what Ripple did in terms of their strategy, is say, like, we never want to be that system of record. We never want to be an HRS system. We're actually think of ourselves as a professional tool. So there's a long-winded way of saying there's tons of challenges, but that's why we haven't launched publicly yet, because we want to nail all those nuanced systems and make sure that we can work in different types of organizations.
And so you can integrate with legacy HR management, performance management systems. Great. Great question. I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll close it out. Looking. Yes, Cindy, please.
So I know you guys are all entrepreneurs. I always think the best entrepreneurs solve a problem that they have wrestled with. So give us some insight into why you each started your particular company to solve that particular problem.
Great question.
15 years ago, as a first-time CEO, I had just raised $15 million out in Silicon Valley, and I had to write a lease commitment for 5 years and understand what my headcount was going to be 5 years from now. I had no bloody idea what it was going to be in 3 months. And that just seemed like an incredibly inefficient thing. So 7 years after that, I started a company called VengaWorks Venture Centers to solve that problem, built a wonderful LEED certified gold building with raised floors, demountable walls, and this neat business model called LiquidSpace. And we were going to build new buildings all over the place. And I got occupancy on that in October of 2008, 6 weeks after Lehman had collapsed, bad timing. And then I recognized that, wait a minute, this is a concept that really needs to be a marketplace. It's not about assets, it's about connecting people to place.
Yeah, about the network. Ben?
So yeah,
Great answer.
For me, what happened is when I was at MIT, we had this sensing technology that we're using in the lab. And then I got approached by this professor from the business school who said, hey, you know, we're trying to study how people communicate at work, and we think that you might be able to get a face-to-face interaction. And so, you know, we didn't really know what we were doing. We said, let's just measure how much people are talking to each other and see how that predicts outcomes. How does it predict sales? How does it predict job satisfaction? At the same time, this professor was collecting email data, IM data, phone call data, and all those metrics. And using the first cut analysis, our data was about 6 times more predictive than anything else they'd collected. The company reorganized based on that. Their sales went way up by like 30%. They grew a ton after that. And we got really excited after that point, and so we just built up the technology, took it from there, and been really passionate about it ever since then.
Matt?
So I started a company while I was doing my undergrad, which turned out to be a jewelry company, and as you can tell, I'm not really a jewelry fashion guy. So I pledged never to start something again that I wasn't super passionate about, and I'm still the chairman of the board there, and Jumvar is doing fantastic. But most of it came out of being like, I'm right at the average age of millennials, and it was in the CEO peer group, and we meet once a quarter. It was all venture-backed, high-growth company CEOs. And I remember sitting there and looking around the room and realizing there was such a disconnect between the way that those people that were sort of my CEO peers connected and communicated with people all around them at work and at home, and how my social peers that were all sort of entry-level people at different companies were connecting and communicating. And when I started, thinking more and more about what I thought were quirky things that I did as a CEO of a company with no experience that gave me any shot at scaling, I realized that a lot of that was indicative of sort of what this next group of managers is going to act like. Yeah. And what we're trying to do is bridge the gap between those two things.
Excellent. So I think we're going to close. What a great panel. If you'd like their information, give me your business card, and I'm happy, especially for LiquidSpace. We're an advisor close support of LiquidSpace, Sociometric Solutions, and Dunwello. Let's give our panel a big round of applause. Thank you.